Hello everyone and welcome back to Fun with Fitzy. Today's video is chapter 10, video 5. We're going to be talking about units of activity amortization. It's sort of like straight line, only it looks at the number of units produced from a machine or the number of miles driven of a vehicle or something like that. That's why they call it the units of activity. It actually depreciates the asset based on its actual usage. Okay, when using the units of activity method, you need to know, basically you need to estimate what the total units of activity for the asset's entire useful life are going to be. For example, if you have an automobile, you might estimate that it's going to be good for 200,000 kilometers. You need to know the cost of your asset and its residual value. And then you need to apply the amortization cost per unit to the number of units of activity the asset actually had during that year. And so we're going to go over a couple of examples. This is not very complicated, just sounds complicated. Okay, in order to get the amortization cost per unit, and your unit could be per number of items produced or per kilometer or something like that, you take your cost minus your salvage value of your asset and divide it by the total units of activity expected. So for example, your car, if you spent $75,000 on a car, that would be your cost. If you think it's going to be worth $5,000 at the end of its useful life, that would be your salvage value. And the 200,000 kilometers you think that car is going to be able to go over its useful life would be the total units of its activity. Once you get that, then you're going to multiply your amortization expense per unit by the number of units produced that year. I'm actually going to change this back to amortization cost per unit so it's not confusing. So let's look at a couple of examples. We'll start with a printing press. A printing press is bought for $150,000 and it is expected to produce 1 million copies during its lifetime with a residual value of $10,000. In the first 2 years, 150,000 and 175,000 copies are produced respectively. Calculate the depreciation expense for the first year using the units of activity method. So our formula is our cost minus residual value divided by the estimated activity over the asset's life. And this formula is to get the cost per unit. So let's plug in our numbers here. I'm going to use my spreadsheet as I did in the last video. So I'm going to start with an equal sign to start the formula. I'm going to put a bracket so it knows order of operations. So it was $150,000 minus its residual value of $10,000. And I'm going to divide that by the 1 million Now you can see the formula here. It's our cost minus our residual value divided by the estimated total activity of the asset in its whole life. So that's giving me a rate here of 14%. So basically I'm going to multiply 14 cents actually. It's giving me 14 cents per unit. We're going to amortize this. So let's take our first year, which was 150,000 units, and I'm going to get our depreciation expense for the first year. I'm going to put that right underneath it here. So I'm going to start my spreadsheet with equals. I'm going to go, this is the number of units involved times the rate. And that's what we're going to use as our depreciation expense in our first year. And let's do our second year. Our second year, we produced 175,000 copies. So now our depreciation is going to be, we're going to take the number, the machine's output basically, and I'm going to multiply it by the cost per unit. And now we have our depreciation expense for our first year and our depreciation expense for our second year. Pretty straightforward. Now you can see the expense is different based on the number of units. If it was less than this number is going to be lower. And if it was more than this one, it's going to be higher. So it kind of fluctuates all over the place. So back to this slide. And we were looking at the graph for straight line and declining balance. Our straight line graph was a straight line. Our declining balance was a declining line. And for units of activity, it's based on the number of units it produced. So the more units it produces in 1 year, the higher the depreciation expense is going to be, and the lower. So it's going to be all over the place. Now let's try our second example here. Again, this is our formula. I'm just going to copy it down to remind you. So to get our cost per unit, we take our cost minus our residual value, and I put that in brackets, so we do that calculation first and then divide it by our estimated activity over the asset's life. So let's plop that in. Just like we did before, I'm going to use my equal sign so that my spreadsheet knows I'm going to do a calculation. I'm going to put an open bracket. My cost was $80,000. My residual value, do I have a residual value? It doesn't have a residual value, so I'm going to put in 0. And I'm going to divide the whole thing by the 10,000 acres of land we expect this equipment to be good for. So that's $8 per acre. So in our first year, which is the only year we have now, we're going to take, what do we have here? We had 2,000. So I'm going to take, again, I'm going to start with an equal or a plus to turn my spreadsheet into a calculator. I'm going to take the 8, I'm going to multiply it by using the asterisk, times it by the 2,000, and it's going to give me $16,000 as the depreciation expense in the first year. Again, every time we do depreciation, we need to do our journal entry, our adjusting journal entry. It's always the same. So at the year end, we always use amortization or depreciation expense. And the amount we calculated for that first year was $16,000. And we use our accumulated amortization depreciation expense account. We actually should name this. And it's $16,000. And that's how simple it is. So by now you should know the formula for units of activity and obviously know how to calculate it, hopefully using a spreadsheet. And there's no proration in this method because it doesn't matter if you bought the asset midway through the year. It just matters how many units it produced or how far it went or whatever your unit of activity is that you're going to be using as your measurement. So there is no proration in this method. Hope this helped, and thanks for watching.